Good evening and welcome to another fascinating episode of the Chocolate Box Presents. I am your host, Chocolate Drop, and yes, you're in for a fascinating program. I am delighted to have on today's episode Mr. Alan King and Mr. Roseboro. And I just forgot your first name that quick. Donald Roseboro. He's also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, so that's a shameless plug. But welcome to the program. And thank you all for agreeing to do this program. Now, what makes this program so unique is that today we're going to talk about something that most people kind of a little bit hesitant about talking about it. And it's both these gentlemen are funeral directors. So I did want to start something, try to break the ice a little bit before we get to the heavy subject. I'm going to see if I can make these gentlemen smile in honor of your profession. But there was a joke that says, why do funeral directors hold most services before 12 p.m.? And the answer is because they're mourning people.
Morning people.
Okay, so it didn't work for you because they're mourning people for 12. So again, you all encounter people at a time when their hearts are heavy. And because with 2020 and 2021, COVID has been around. There's been a lot of talk about death, people dying. So I want to kind of do this program so help people before that inevitable transition happens to think more about death and dying. Okay, so what are some of the things that you all would kind of hope that people would know more about your profession, about funeral directors, about embalming and about death?
Well, first and foremost, they need to know that funeral directors are just everyday people.
Okay.
And we are approachable. Just because we're in a certain profession, that doesn't mean that we can't sit down and talk with you. It's better to talk with a funeral director before something happens than after.
The pre-planning.
Yeah, exactly.
And you were talking about that earlier. You were saying, what was the phrase you used? At service, at need?
Well, at need is where, when they die. Then, pre-need is when you can pre-arrange or pre-plan your funeral, like pre-thinking.
Okay, so just planning in advance.
Yeah.
So what percentage of people do you find that will take that proactive approach? Or do people say someone just put it off and I don't want to deal with it, and then they end up in that at need arena?
About 35%.
35%. And when it comes down to the actual day when you've got to go and visit the family, walk us through that process. What is that like? You get a phone call from somebody that says that their loved one has passed away.
Well, the process, normally, you get the call, you first do the removal, whether it's at a hospital,
you call it a removal, right?
Home, or it could be a nursing home, whatever. You go there and do the removal, and then you contact the family and set up an arrangement time. And from that arrangement time, you go over everything from the death certificate all the way to the actual funeral itself.
Okay, and so you use the word removal, and there's some lingo and some terms that you all use amongst yourselves that people say, well, what does that mean? So when you say at need, even though it's kind of self-explanatory, and you said removal. So removal is like going to pick up the body, right? And so, I mean, you have to have people ready to do that, like 24/7, or how does that work?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a 24-hour business.
So you never know when you're going to get the phone call?
Never know.
Okay.
So you have to have your people lined up and ready to go.
So I want to go back again, we talk about terminology. Funeral directors, undertakers, are there any terms that are preferred versus some that are considered offensive?
You got morticians.
Morticians.
Embalmers. You got, like you say, undertakers.
All those are euphemisms for the same person, same profession. Okay, all right. Let's talk about embalmers, because that word in my mind conjures up someone that's actually like surgical, instruments and cutting and stuff like that. Is that part of the embalming process? And then what is entailed in the embalming process?
In the embalming process, that's the anatomy that you have to know.
Okay.
And that's what we do to delay discomposition.
To delay discomposition, the decomposition of the body?
Yes, trying to preserve the body for the day of the funeral or for a later date.
What are some common preconceptions that people may have about your line of work? What are some things that people may think that has nothing to do with what you do?
The fact that we say undertakers have cold hands.
Okay.
But if you got cold hands, you got a warm heart. So.
Okay, so you got that already ready for them. You heard that one before. Would you like to answer that?
I guess they're afraid of us. Some people are spooked of a funeral home, man, a mortician or whatnot. They look at us as a different group in society, you know, which we, like he said earlier, we're just regular people.
Okay.
And we just in that profession to help you during the loss of your loved one.
Yeah. So is this a profession that you chose? I mean, do people kind of go to school to become morticians, embalmers, funeral directors, or is this something that's passed down from generation to generation? You know, how would one say,
It could be
I
both.
think that's a very lucrative business. Because people, you know, what one of the jokes, you never run out of business or something like that. Right?
It can be both.
Yeah.
Some people have a passion for the business, and some people is born into the business, which I'm not gonna say you're forced to be in it, but it's part of your livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
And before you'll see, say, outsiders coming in to take over something that your parents started or your foreparents started, you will take initiative into going to school to
Get the certification and the licenses.
and keep the business going.
Okay. Same here?
Well, you know, and it's a business that you have to have compassion for people. And, you know, if you don't have that compassion or if you don't have the tolerance and the patience, you know, the funeral business is not for you.
And so before the camera started rolling, we were talking about with what's been happening, again, I said with COVID, assuming that you all's business was really increasing, but saying it really hasn't, it's been increasing, but not necessarily due to COVID?
No, not, you know, in volume that you would expect now. Your largest cities like New York.
Chicago.
And out in California, you know, where they have massive numbers, deceased coming in daily, you know, they are having somewhat of an influx of cases. So then, you know, they don't have anywhere to put them, you know, and that's where you
Get the refrigerated trucks and stuff like that?
You know, they're just overwhelmed with cases. But here in North Carolina, you know, it hadn't got to that severity yet.
Legally, what are some things that people need to know about, you know, like the time of death and for the time that, you know, the body has to be funeralized? Are there any time periods? I mean, there was, you know, one of the famous, I heard about James Brown, you know, that it was like weeks before they put him. Probably some other, I think Michael Jackson, that it was weeks before he was actually buried. You know, are there some legal rules, timetable that you have to abide by?
Just as long as the body is preserved, if it's going to be a viewing.
State board do require some, as on the funeral director side, not for say the family side, but there are certain qualifications that we do have to meet, like 5 days to file a death certificate.
Okay.
And those are things that we're not trying to rush the family, but we can, in certain counties, be held responsible for not turning these certain documents
Within a 5-day
within
period?
a certain time.
Okay. So is there any kind of pressure in terms of,
Can.
you know, here it is, they're grieving, and you say, look, I need to get this document.
Could be, because sometimes people are thinking you're trying to force them.
So they need to understand that, look, it's
Yeah.
not me, it's the
It's the regulations.
regulations.
And you know, it's a lot of times, you know, folks are in denial. First of all, when you
Can't
lose a
believe
loved one, you know, you're in denial, you know, so they just don't think it's real. So, you know, and then that causes a situation where they don't react as quickly as they should.
Yeah, and which impedes what you can do. Right, you know. Have you all ever had, as much as you can share, some really unique requests from families when it came to their loved ones being, you know, buried? Anything that was kind of really unique? Say, we never had that request before.
Yeah, we have.
Do tell.
Okay, I had a case where
Mr. King is over there smiling.
the man died, and his request was to have his dogs killed and put in front at the foot of his grave. Well, you know, I'm not one for cruelty to animals,
Right.
you know, so I said that's a little bit far-fetched for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
He wasn't just joking, though, was he?
No, he was serious.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow. Mr. King?
I keep it basic. They request horse and carriages and motorcycles, and some request to be dressed a certain way in the casket.
Okay.
Maybe in they certain football attire.
Okay.
It's the request that we do have.
Years ago, there was something that made Jet magazine. I don't know if you remember it, but there was a guy, he wanted to be buried in his Cadillac.
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
a pimp.
Oh, you remember that story, right? Yeah.
In Chicago.
It was in Chicago, okay.
And he was buried in 1976 Seville.
Okay, so why you remember that?
I read that article over and over and over again.
So you all haven't had anything that bizarre or unique?
We had a request here lately. The woman wanted for her husband to go back home with her one more time before they buried him. So she wanted the remains to go back home and be placed in the bed with her before the next day the funeral.
And you honored that request?
Well, we didn't honor it, but you asked me of a certain request that's ununique. Yeah. But
so let's talk about different forms of, disposing of the bodies. You know, we got cremations. We got, I guess, what are some other ones? I mean, cremation is the first ones come to mind. But are there any other ways that are within the guidelines of the laws that a body can be disposed of? I think in some cultures you can put it on a pyre, and just let the birds and stuff, do away with it. You're like giving your body back to nature. What are some of the rules in North Carolina as it relates to how you can dispose of a body?
Well, back to your first question. Now they have a hydraulic system.
Hydraulics.
Now, how does that work?
It's an alkaline hydraulics, like icing. Something about the ice, like, what is it, hard ice?
And what it does, it liquefies your body instead of burning it.
Okay.
Crystallize.
Yeah, and then it with the liquefaction, it has you can use it for fertilizer and
So you can really go back into the garden, right?
Oh, exactly, and that's their concept with that process.
Any others? Because this is my first time hearing that one. Is there any other that's kind of like people that hadn't caught on yet? Probably started in California. Something's gonna make its way to the. Any other ones?
I believe that's the latest one, the one he was talking about, the hydraulics.
So we're talking about. I want to get to cremation cost. Some people feel like that's less expensive than, let's say, the liquefaction or, a traditional funeral. Talk to us about cost.
Well, it's getting that way because the demand and supply is so great. It's not as cheap as it used to be. Because if you have the right components in a service, then it could just be just as high as a traditional funeral. And sometimes traditional funerals are a little bit cheaper. And it just all depends on what a family wants.
What they pick.
So the a la carte, they can add stuff and they can just go.
Yeah, what they pick, what they choose.
Okay. At the burial, there is a myth that the person, you probably know where I'm going with this, is that the body doesn't really go in the ground. And that when the family leaves, then the casket is taken away and the body's out. Is this new? You've heard this before?
Yeah, we heard of that.
So put that to rest to our viewers who say, I was hoping he asked that question.
Well, and
probably some of the people on the crew right now was probably hoping I asked that question.
In our professionalism, being professional and satisfying families at need, we don't do those type of things.
So how does a myth like that get started? How does it continue to go?
Well, that's just like the old common myth. I have a lot of people to ask me, do the bodies sit up? And I've been in the funeral business.
I've heard that one. It's like raise up.
Yeah, I've been in the funeral business pretty close to 30 years, and knock on wood, I have my first time to see that.
Okay. So, Ms. King, you've heard the same thing, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of myths that they talk about. Yeah, a lot of myths.
Yeah, and so that's the reason why I want to do this program. Rather than have something continue, we can shut those myths down. So bodies are not popping up, people not being dumped out at the funeral home, at the gravesite, and then they're reselling the casket.
Well, you got a lot of unprofessional people that's some haven't had license, or some that have had license, and a lot of times, I don't know if they cutting corners or, but certain myths that do come about probably came from people that was unprofessional and made a bad choice, which can cause people to look at us
And the origin of these myths, folks would, or the Undertaker himself back in the day, and this was in the early portions of the history, they wanted to protect their business. So all these myths came out from them protecting their business, you know. I mean, prime example, when you go from Afro-American, you know, to Caucasian funerals,
I was going to ask you about that, the difference in the
they would say that the body would turn dark, you know, but that's, if the body is embalmed, it's not going to turn dark.
If it's embalmed properly.
Properly.
Yeah.
So we touched upon this earlier, so the embalming process. What do you do in terms of makeup, in terms of fixing the hair? Somebody got to bring the suit, and, you know, just what's all, and what do you do if you get somebody that's really large, a heavyweight person? You know, if there's no coffin that's large enough for them. Have you had that happen? What do you do? Or someone who's too tall?
Yeah, well, you have to take measurements and measure how wide the casket is, and make sure that the remains will fit properly, as well as the grave site. The grave, we have to. It's a lot of people involved.
Okay.
We just the directors that make sure that we satisfy the family, give them what they need. But being experienced in the business, we would know that you would have to take measurements, that you would have to do embalming properly, depending on the funeral that the family choose, the dates, the time. It's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of people involved that's behind the scenes.
Have you ever had any, some of the issues that I just described, where you've had to modify to accommodate a person? Have you ever personally experienced that?
Yeah, we just had that last week. We had a 600-pound deceased.
600 pounds?
600 pounds. And that'll weigh down a church. So what you do, and like Alan was saying previously,
custom casket.
You custom select the products.
Okay.
So anytime you're over 28 inches, you have to have an oversized vault. Or, you know, you can't put a 600-pound in a 28-inch.
It just won't
vault.
fit.
It just won't fit, you know.
Right.
So, and, you know, and that's the process that you have to go through.
And I guess you got to be very professional and diplomatic. I mean, you're kind of smiling a little bit, but how do you, is it what, 6 pallbearers, or you got to have additional pallbearers?
You're probably gonna need 10 to 12.
Yeah, that's when it's other people involved. You know, you have to get extra help because it's a.
So where do you all see the industry going? I mean, you got a lot of stuff with technology and social media and the internet and stuff. Do you feel that your business is going to be impacted by that? I mean, like we didn't talk about, but Zoom funerals, that's just more of a visual. But is there anything that you all see coming down the pipeline as it relates to what you all do? Are you going to always have a job or a profession or a career?
You'll always have a job because, I mean, even though you deviate from the traditional methods, there's new and creative things that are coming out. So, and you know, you don't have a whole lot of cemetery space when the land is, you know, you're gonna have to go through other situations.
Like what, stacking people on top of each other? Or
not
liquefaction?
So liquefaction and, you know, cremation, and that's why there's a rise in cremation.
Oh, because they don't have any land where you can bury. You know. I've often wondered about, you know, areas that flood, you know, like, you know, Katrina or any place where there's a bunch of flooding, you know, seldom does the news media talk about the funerals. And I know just recently they were talking about how some caskets kind of popped up on people's yard, and this is within the past, I guess, 2 or 3 months. But what are some rules associated with that? You know, do they come back to the funeral and say, I need you to, can I get a do-over? Can you, you know, you bury them?
I'm not too sure. We don't run into that problem here.
Don't have that problem.
But I'm sure the government gets involved. I'm sure then.
Well, down in areas like Wilmington and Kinston
the
and the coast areas, you know, that's a common problem. If it rains hard, you might have a body come up. So, you know, and they just contact the local funeral director and have them to reinter the body.
Interesting. In the remaining minutes or so that we have, I did want to kind of give you an opportunity just to talk about some things that you feel that people could do, again, to make your job a lot easier. I mean, to be better prepared, as you said, but like how far in advance, 6 months, if you nobody's in hospice and, look, we need to go see Mr. King or Mr. Roseboro, or, the further in advance, the better.
Well, it's hard to go that far in advance. I'll give you a prime example. I had a family call me and they had put a lady in hospice. Mm-hmm. This was in November. So 3 months went by, and I'm wondering, I said, did she pass? So after 6 months came up, they called me again. And they said, I said, so did the lady pass? And they said, no, she's doing fine.
She's back at
but
home,
her
right?
sister passed. We want you to pick up her sister. So this lady lived to the following November. It started in November and ended in November of the following year. So long as there is breath, there is hope.
Okay. Yeah, so even though the family had already, checked her in the hospice. Yeah.
And the doctors will tell you that. But like I said, long as there is breath, there's hope.
Okay. You want to add to that?
Mr. Roseboro got it.
Yeah. We met, just to roll this back a little bit, as a result of a mutual friend, one of our fraternity brothers.
Certainly.
Who had a unique request. So you want to share with our viewers about the request and why it was really, I think he was honored that you were able to fulfill his request. And,
okay, he was a prominent medical doctor here in Charlotte. And his request was, at the time of his demise, he wanted to be buried within 24 hours. He didn't want to be embalmed. He just wanted to be buried within 24 hours of his death. And, he called me up, and that's what took place. But,
and he had a certain attire that he wanted to.
Yeah, and he had a special casket, which was a pine wood casket, because he said that, he had served people all his life. Right. And, when he passed, he wanted to be considered as poor. He could have had a bronze casket, mahogany casket, anything that he wanted. But, that was his request, to have something simple.
Yeah. And that left an indelible impression on me, so I kind of wanted to at least do a program like this just to kind of encourage people to, again, he thought it out. And for the people who weren't privy to that conversation, they felt like, well, 24 hours, that's not enough time for me to travel from LA to good, but you had to honor his request.
Exactly.
Did you get any pushback from that, from people who didn't understand that this is what
No, as a matter of fact, that service was supposed to be private, and we got to the cemetery, and it was tons of people already in the cemetery, because he was well loved.
He was well loved, yeah, and well known.
Well known.
Yeah. Mr. King, any similar situations where you kind of had to just honor the deceased request? I know you said yours is like at need, but you've been in this for how long?
It's generations.
Generations.
I've been in it, but I've been licensed since '06.
Since '06. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now your family is prominent in South Carolina in the funeral business.
Yeah, most of my family's in the funeral business.
You want to say the name? Did we say the name? Say the name of your family.
Oh, it's King Funeral Home.
King Funeral Home. And say the name of your...
Donald I. Roseboro and Roseboro Mortuary.
Roseboro, okay. Now, so who are some of the most, if you can disclose, famous people that maybe you have funeralized or buried?
Valona on Good Times, we buried her mother. And she died about 6 months after that, out in Las Vegas.
Okay. On Good Times.
On Good Times.
Okay, yeah, everybody, I'm sure y'all familiar with her. Okay, all right. Mr. King?
Well, it's a number of people we buried. Got school teachers, doctors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. One of the main things we want to kind of leave our viewers with is that you all are not to be afraid. It's nothing to be afraid of. You're approachable. You even have jokes every now and then. I couldn't kind of get you all to give me any, but you're human beings. And so when you all see these gentlemen or anybody who's in this profession, walk up to them, talk to them, ask them questions, like that. So thank you so much for taking time to come and share your knowledge with us. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that we probably left on the table. Oh, yeah. But as they say, that funeral directors, you'll be the last ones to let them down, right?
That's correct.
Good. So we like to end our program by offering our guests an opportunity to participate in a little ritual we call the eating of the chocolate. So Mr. Donald Roseboro, please dig in, take your pick.
Okay.
And Mr. King,
Okay.
Alan King, likewise.
All right.
My name is Chocolate Drop. You have been watching the Chocolate Drop Presents. And I want to encourage you to tune in each week, same day, same channel, for another fascinating episode of the Chocolate Box. And we'll see you next week. Let's eat up, gentlemen. Y'all been laughing at my joke. I thought that was a funny joke.